So we have great ambitions in Europe. If you look at the European Commission's plan, Horizon 2020, we want to achieve growth that is smart, inclusive, and sustainable. That requires an immense amount of policy making, but we have a real crisis in Europe today in terms of how we think about policy. What is the role of the state, both transnationally and also nationally? Is it just to create the conditions, the background conditions, to level the playing field, to de-risk, to facilitate, and then to get out of the way? Or do we need more strategic, courageous, if you want, mission-oriented policies? Well, my answer is the latter. And what I try to do in the book is really to actually look at particular parts of the world, from Silicon Valley, but also to China today and Germany today, on what actually allowed particular countries and regions to actually achieve this smart growth, and also how can we transform that to be more inclusive. And really the key lesson is that what actually was required was a very active state that looked, for example, at the whole innovation chain, that didn't just invest in science, but also was quite active on applied research, and also supplied the kind of financing that we need for the most innovative companies that realistically cannot get high-risk, patient, long-term, committed finance from the private sector. So the strategic role of the state actually immediately scares people, right? It looks too active. Wait a second, what are you doing? You're choosing directions? You choose IT and nanotech and biotech or energy today? That's too much. The market should decide. And in fact, that's completely wrong, because if we look at all the technology in our iPhone, which I talk about in the book, it was all actually chosen by particular public agencies, decentralized network of different types of public agencies, which actually financed all the technology that actually renders the iPhone a smartphone. Now, of course, the lessons are not just for high tech. We see an immense amount of, if you want, active strategic states around life sciences, but also in energy. Just look at Germany's Energiewende policy is actually quite inspirational, because it's gone beyond just financing renewable energy. It's also become a completely new direction for the whole economy. And in fact, if we look at technological revolutions of the past, even say the mass production revolutions, without a direction, they would not have had the effect that they did. So with mass production, we had suburbanization, which was really a demand pull kind of policy, which enabled mass production to have the effect it did. Now, what are the lessons for Europe? We're saying we want all this wonderful growth, and yet then we have things like the Maastricht criteria, which are actually preventing particular countries to actually make these investments, because let's not forget, it actually costs money. Now, what we, of course, must keep our eyes on are the debt to GDP ratio, but the key issue is how all these different policies that I've been talking about have actually enabled long-run growth in GDP. So you might have some countries like, say, Italy, which has absolutely lacked these kind of strategic, mission-oriented investments, which also increase productivity. And so its GDP and productivity growth have been stagnant for 20 years, almost 15 to 20 years, stagnant productivity growth in Italy. So even with a mild deficit, Italy's deficit has over the last 2 decades been lower than Germany's. Even with a mild deficit, your debt to GDP ratio can escalate very, very high because the denominator is not growing. And so what we don't have right now in Europe, I think, is a proper analysis of why we have this core in the periphery. Was it just the Schroeder reforms in the 1990s that, capped wages relative, if you want, to productivity in Germany? Was that what, was the, if you want, recipe for Germany's miracle? Or was that simply, if you want, to contain employment, after the unification of the East and the West? I think that policy, right or wrong, was mainly focused on employment. But in terms of competitiveness, what has Germany actually done, which the famous pigs don't do? Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, a terrible word, by the way, invented by Goldman Sachs. Well, what does Germany have? It has patient long-term finance through a public bank. It has the Fraunhofer Institutes, which are a key component of its innovation system. It not only has higher than average R&D spending, but the spending has also been, again, mission-oriented through different types of policies, for example, the Energiewende policy. We don't have any of those components right now in the weakest parts of Europe. So first is the analysis, what actually makes a core and a periphery? What is the theory of competition, if you want, that enables us to understand these differences? And then in terms of the solution, will the current austerity policies and the different, if you want, pressures that are also coming in from the financial markets and the credit ratings agencies, will they actually enable the core to reach the kind of competitiveness of the periphery, or will we get more and more, if you want, disparity? And I think we absolutely will get more disparity until we actually have a new analysis of what's required in Europe to bring the different areas together and actually have a division of innovative labor where we have different areas, if you want, specializing, but also working very closely together. Because let's not forget, this is not about manufacturing versus services, for example. This is about, again, having mission-oriented policies which enable a revitalization across many different sectors. Going to the moon, 13 different sectors were involved.